This conference will now be recorded.
And good morning. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Let me get everything to line up. Okay, so good morning. My name is Amy Julian, and this is our third in our series of really looking at communicating through COVID and communicating with our virtual teams. And one of the things we're going to talk about today is really virtual team building. And so we've talked about, communication through email last week. We talked about team structure and some of the things that we can do in that first week. And then next week, we're going to spend a lot of time talking about Teams itself. So what is the team, Microsoft Teams, that you all have access to, and how can you use that to really build and discuss with your virtual team? So getting started here, first little note is that you are all able to mute and unmute yourself. So please do that as you'd like to speak. Please introduce yourself by typing your name into the chat box there and letting me know who's here, though I can't see your name. So if there's anybody on the phone, if you're able to type in, or if you're having technical difficulties, I'm hoping we're able to work through those. And then please type any questions in the chat box, or feel free to respond. This is an interactive exercise, as the last few have been, and we really want to have some dialogue and conversation. I do encourage you to engage and participate, so we can all just have some fun as we're talking about today. So what is a virtual team? Or what is virtual team building? And that's really what we're going to talk about today. Virtual team building activities to open lines of communication amongst your team. Again, even with the situations that we're having with COVID, we are still building our teams. We're still transitioning our teams. And I know that there's also individuals who are joining and leaving our team. So it's an odd time, I think, for some of us that feels a little uncomfortable and odd. But at the same time, it's really essential that we understand that we still need to have those roles of building our teams, and what can we do to do that. We're going to talk about virtual team building activities, and then tools for communicating with your team beyond that 10,000 emails. And I will say, last week we had that idea of Patrick saying that he had 14,000 emails in his inbox, which was a little bit disturbing, but I think we'll find I hope you've learned some ways that we can address all those emails that are in there. And today we're going to talk about ways that we can communicate without having everything be in the email, looking at different functions that we have. So let's kind of get started here. What is a virtual team? And what is virtual team building? So virtual team building is the ongoing process of bringing remote teams together. And the intention is to help your team achieve deeper bonds, creating a collaborative environment that is similar to the in-office setting. So there's a lot of things that we'll talk about today that could be done in office once we are all back in the office. I know for us, we have a set time that we are coming back. And then for others, we don't know when we're going to be back. So that's one of those things that we want to have some team building as we're moving through that virtual platform. And why is it important? Focusing on good team building isn't a priority for many team leaders, and that's something that has kind of fallen off, especially lately with the COVID pandemic and the response that Illinois has had to the COVID pandemic. We've been very focused on what we need to do, and it is kind of that time that we want to take a breath and say, okay, how's the mental state of everyone? How is everyone doing? How is my team functioning? And of course, we're all have our own stressors, and we've talked about that over the last couple of weeks. We all have our own things that we're dealing with, but at the same time, the work does still need to be done. But how are we focusing on how the team dynamic works? And one of the things that we're going to talk about today is how focusing on team building is really important. So team managers sometimes assume that remote workers don't really care about connecting with their coworkers, and I think we also kind of are more in our bubble when we are all working virtually than we are when we're in the office. So they may not realize the benefit of collaborating with people who work from home. And so as we move back, and depending on where you are and what your situation is like, some of us might be moving back in June, some of us might be moving back in July, and then others might be waiting till August or so. So depending on how how your agency is going to be rolling that out versus, how my university is rolling that out. If you haven't seen these are a fun little conference call bingo. It is something that is kind of done as a silliness, but again, this is more of a lighthearted looking at how we can build teams. But how many times, and again, for those of you who are like me, who are on conference calls back to back to back, how many times a day do we hear, oops, I was on the mute button, or can you hear me, or sorry, my phone dropped the call, or someone, a toilet flushing in the background, things of that nature. So that's just kind of a fun anecdote, and there are tons of those online of different things that companies have put out as their just conference call bingos. So why should we focus on team building? And this is really something to kind of take a second and a pause and look at. It builds relationships, which are really important for retention and for recruitment. So if you're looking at building your team, if you're looking at retaining those members on your team, you want to focus on team building. You want to have some conversations about team building. So it builds relationships. It combats loneliness. And one of the things that has really happened as part of COVID is that if you are an individual who does not have a house full of people that you have to deal with, there's good and bad to both of those, but you do have some individuals possibly on your team being a little bit more lonely. And so you want to be sure that everybody's mental state is good, because mentally healthy people do better work and are more productive, and just engaging them in that way. And then it also improves productivity, because if you're having that relationship with somebody and you're combating that loneliness, and those again can lead to depression, you're going to have improved productivity for your team. So that's why we should take a minute and focus on team building. And there is research on this. I'm not making this stuff up. There's a lot of research on this. And the one that I want to show you here is a study by Remote Co. found that 87% of remote workers feel more connected through the use of video conferencing. And so if you have the opportunity to use video conferencing with your team for icebreakers and games like that, do it. And we're going to talk a little bit about different ways to engage. I'm not a huge fan of icebreakers, and I'm going to guess that a couple people on the call are kind of breathing a sigh of relief to that. But there are some things that we can do that can take the focus more on the camaraderie of the team and less on this is all the stuff we have to do. And I think there's some fun ways to do that. And many of you are, let me see here, I think quite a few of you are sharing or they were earlier, sharing your cameras. And again, for this situation where I'm more talking to you, it's a little different, but it is nice to see people's faces. It is nice to interject with people. And as humans, we need that. We need to be able to see faces. We need to be able to communicate. And there's a whole article that came out from the Washington Post yesterday about the science of becoming a masked society, and whether or not we are going to be more isolated by being a masked society because we are not able to see the full face, because a lot of individuals do communicate, actually most humans communicate with their full face, so the smile and not just the smiling eyes. But I think that we are going to be in that platform for a little bit, so we have to embrace what we have to kind of move forward. So last week I talked about 15 email etiquette things, and ironically I have 15 team building ideas and activities that we can do. So we're going to walk through these this morning, and I want to kind of ask you what you think about these, or if you've done any of these. The first one is that idea of, and I'm a child of the 90s, so Cribs, the remote team edition, taken from that idea of MTV Cribs, or the peek into each other's homes, allowing the virtual team, leading them through an exercise where you can see something in their house, kind of like House Hunters or MTV. The idea is to show something that's going on within your home, showing something from your team, so you can get an idea of their personal space, what they're working in. So for example, if you were to work in your team and you all have your cameras on, say, okay, what does your workspace look like? Maybe have them kind of rotate the laptop around and say, this is the space I'm working in. It is entertaining. It's also, when you're able to show your screen, unless you're on Zoom and you can do those backgrounds, you can see where people are. And the other day we were having a staff meeting, and two of my team were sitting outside, and I kind of made a joke. I'm like, you guys are brave, because where I'm at, it's been popping up showers all day long. And they're like, no, we're good. And then downpour. I was like, see, I'm not crazy. But yeah, that's a fun activity that you can do, and that doesn't take much time. So, starting your meetings or starting your engagements, like, where is everybody today? Has anybody done that? Anybody want to share out or talked about, have they done that? Go ahead. Anna Marie, it sounded like you were going to say something.
Well, I was just going to say I haven't, but I worry that some people might feel an invasion of privacy or something.
Well, again, yeah, know your team. If somebody does feel, and let them have the option not to share in any of these things. There are individuals who don't want you in their home. And it also depends on where they're sitting. So, for example, and I think I've told you guys this a couple of weeks ago, in our home setup, I got the home office basically because I talk on the phone more than my husband does. So I got the home office and he's out in the family room. Now where he's at showing his screen, kids can walk by, there's dog and all that, but I have a door. So if I show my screen, we also have country internet. So if any of you live in central Illinois and not in an urban area in central Illinois, i.e. cornfields, the internet's a little sketchy. So I often call in because I have that issue with that. So, I mean, there are reasons why people wouldn't want to share, but just again, these are just ideas and things that several sites and several research has said that is effective to kind of build that camaraderie. The next one is that desert island scenario. And some of you might have been able to play this at school or have played this at meetings. But you ask the virtual team to give a scenario where they're stranded on the desert island and there are 7 objects that they can bring with them. What are those 7 that they would bring? Or you say, of these 7 objects, which is another way to do it, of these 7 objects, which 3 would you bring with you on the desert island? You can make the objects obscure. You can, consider different possibilities, but think about what those look like. And again, that's just a way to kind of gauge that conversation and engage with participants. Things that would go with that is kind of like a bag of fruit or a 100-foot rope or something like that. And if you have the capabilities, depending on how large your team is, you can split them into smaller groups for any of these things and kind of have those conversations. But that's also a nice, depending on how you roll it out, short way to say, okay, these are 7 things, like kind of show pictures on your screen. These are 7 items. Which 3 would you take with you if you're stranded on a desert island? Something to think about there. That came up a lot in the research on looking at this. The next one is that personal facts or fun facts guessing game. And there's a couple different ways to do that. The idea of you kind of put you ask for fun facts about people on your team. So let's say that my team consists of Jennifer and myself and Connie. And so we each turn in 2 or 3 fun facts, and we'll throw another person in there, Brittany. So each of us turn in some fun facts. As the leader, I put them all together, and then we kind of match what fun facts go with one person. And so that's kind of exciting. Like what has been your favorite show to binge during COVID? And if somebody says the Ozark and somebody else says, iZombie, and somebody else says Outer Banks, all of which interesting shows, you put those in and say, okay, who's been watching that? So that's just, again, kind of an icebreaker. The next one there, number 4, is that idea of sharing a photo, sharing something that they do want to share, and then that's, again, back to Anna Marie's point, not as intrusive into the home, but allowing them to share and talk about something within their space and what's going on. You can guide that in different ways, making the photo possibly be about something that they've done during COVID. So have they gone on walks? Have they been watching birds? Have they been engaging with family? Things of that nature. But just that idea of allowing that sharing time really will build that team. The last one there, number 5, is something that we have talked about a couple times now, and it's that idea of community coffee breaks. And I believe a couple teams are doing that as like water cooler discussions, but setting a time throughout the day or setting a time really throughout the week. I don't think anybody does it every day, and says, okay, this is when we're going to get together and socialize. Not necessarily a happy hour, but kind of that idea of a community coffee break. So we come together, we kind of have some conversation around what is going on in our lives and what's going on with work. What are some challenges? What are some barriers that are things that we don't necessarily or are not necessarily able to talk about in these meetings that we're having, but at the same time, they're conversations that are those sidebar conversations that really do enrich the team. So any questions with the first 5 there? Yes, Patrick, great comment that he finds that enjoying a little bit of conversation, and I know you all can see that, is really helpful, and it, again, keeps us from feeling isolated. So I think that's really important too. And do engage in that conversation as you're leading into a meeting, especially before the recording and all of that fun stuff starts. So let's go forward a little bit. Number 6 there is bucket list. So share your bucket list. What are things you want to do? What is something that you want to do as a team? What is something that each of your individuals on the team wants to do? So for example, I have a friend who is right now, she's a teacher, so she's off for the summer, and she's down in Gatlinburg and they're ziplining, and it was something that was on her bucket list. So what are things that would be on your bucket list, and talk about those things. And that can really kind of express what is different among each of you and what is the same. So for example, I have a fear of heights. So the idea of ziplining sounds amazing until the fact that I have to climb above the tree line to get there, and then it's not going to work. So things like that are really something to kind of think about what what is on your bucket list, and share those out. Share with each other, or play another version of this that was discussed was the when I retire. When I retire, I'm going to go here. When I retire, I'm going to go somewhere else. This next one, the That's Right, Bob, is one that I kind of find entertaining, but also a little funny that this is something that is on the top 15. It is that idea of kind of the memory game. So you start, and it's done around that idea of building a conversation. And it is fun if you have new members. So I think this is really something that if you're really trying to get to know people, a lot of these are really fun as we're building our team camaraderie. So you say something, and then someone else, so they say a sentence. I'm planning to go camping this weekend. And then someone else would say, that's right, Bob. And then whatever else. I'm planning to go boating this weekend. And that's right, Bob. And it kind of becomes a funny move around. Or you can also, there's a couple individuals like Google frames it around work. My most challenging call today was around this. My most challenging call today was around data processing. And then they said, oh, that's right, Bob. My most challenging call today was something else. So it's kind of a round robin idea, but it also does build that idea of just seeing how people are in that checking in. Number 8 really builds on that as well, that idea of show and tell. So having somebody show something and tell about what it is and what it has, how it has impacted them, what their role is with it. And all of you have different interests and things like that. So that would be a fun, again, maybe do it during your coffee break, maybe do it during that social time. And these are for those staff meetings. These are for those team meetings where you're getting together in those smaller groups and saying, okay, we need to have this bonding because we're working together on a regular basis. So what is some show and tell? So for example, as we were moving into COVID, I had a coworker who, for whatever reason, she had a plague mask that her son had used as a costume. And she showed that and said, this is something that is kind of freaking me out in my house. And we did a kind of a show and tell about that stuff. Other individuals, and we've done this for my team personally, not necessarily in the meetings, but as a channel on Teams. So we have a hidden channel on Teams. So it's not that the whole university can see it, but it's a hidden channel for us. And we call it our happy hour. And so things like one of my team members got a new puppy. So she shared pictures of the new puppy and told about the new puppy. So just mechanisms to really keep us aware that we all do have lives outside of work and that we do have things going on. That's what we're really looking at for that team building. Number 9 is one that I don't know if I'd like or not like, but it's that idea of a simulated problem. So we come up with a problem, we talk about how to address it. This is something that's really nice when you're dealing with somebody new. It's also something that's really nice when you're trying to communicate protocols or office culture, which is challenging in a virtual environment. So a simulated problem could be anything from, actually, I've been to the office in Springfield where you can't lock the door when you leave because the door will stay locked. So someone got locked in the bathroom. How do we address that problem? Or an email protocols or communication protocols. If you go into those early and are proactive about it, instead of having to be reactive when something goes wrong, it really does help the climate of the team. So a simulated problem can be different It can be something that we don't necessarily know is going to happen. I promise you, none of us in any of these scenarios did I ever say, hey, let's plan for a pandemic. No. And most of the time and I know like State Farm had a protocol for a pandemic and that everyone would have to emergency go home. And the individuals who wrote it, who I do know very well, said we had no idea. That was not something that we thought we would have to do. But again, you can make it more engaging, but I think that's a nice way. It's an engaging way to kind of roll out any of those office culture things that, especially if you're bringing someone on when everyone is remote, to help them be aware of as they move forward. It also is something to really kind of, as you're bringing somebody on when we're all in the office, what are some simulated issues that we want to avoid, that we want to deal with? And then number 10 there kind of goes back to that idea of the bucket list, but what is your perfect vacation? And, that idea of just sharing out where do you see yourself? What would be your perfect vacation? And what's fun about that is if you've ever done that exercise, it's very different for a lot of people. Because a lot of you, I'm guessing, are sitting there saying, well, my perfect vacation, well, let's kind of do this. Let's put it in the chat box here. 2 words, what is your perfect vacation? Is it beach? Is it hiking? Is it by yourself? Is it with your whole family? Let's see some comments in the chat box. What is your perfect vacation? I'll give you a second to type in there. And again, let's just pretend money's not an issue. Where would you absolutely want to go? Perfect vacation. Nice. We have some people want to be on the beach, hiking in the mountains. Costa Rica, I've heard, is beautiful. My sister has gone there several times. A tree house in the jungle. I love the idea, but the bugs would drive me crazy. Someone said a cruise. That's impressive in the current climate, but awesome. Laying on a beach. You'll have a lot of those shipped to yourself at this point, John, if you get to go on a cruise. Actually, they'll probably be cleaner and safer than they ever were before if you go on a cruise. But I've not been, and I think that is something that I've always wanted to do in Alaska, like an Alaskan cruise. So yeah, the fun, and thank you for all of you who participated. The fun part of this is that it's something you don't know. And a lot of people have a cultural frame of reference that they feel, and they often look at the world and say, okay, well, everyone kind of sees things my way. And a lot of these team building exercises are designed to really expand you in understanding the cultural frame of reference of your team members, because many of us have, and I'm very guilty of this, I assume that everyone knows all the lovely information that's in my head. And it's important to have those conversations. It's important to kind of talk about where people are in an informal setting, because then when you get into looking at their strengths and weaknesses as what you want to help them build in a formal setting in their work environment, they really do translate. One of the things that when I actually, several times, when you're going somewhere, people say, hey, I'll stop and grab a coffee, or do you want a coffee? I am not a coffee drinker. I hear the gasp through the phone. I understand. Yes, you're like, oh my gosh, how do you? Yeah, it is bewildering to people who are coffee drinkers that I do not drink coffee. And it's very entertaining to me, because it is something that if you say you don't like tea, or if you say you're not drinking soda, everybody's like, okay, that sounds fantastic. But if you say you don't drink coffee, like there's something wrong with you if you don't drink coffee. Patrick, I love this comment. It seems that he is hearing how people, as soon as they get into meeting, are very little discussion about the good aspects that people are enjoying about working remotely. I enjoy hearing why people are liking it, and many people feel guilty about not being in the office setting. It's okay to appreciate being at home. It's okay to appreciate the situation that we're in. It's okay to appreciate the fact that our lives have all slowed down a little bit, at least some of us have, and we can take a breath. Because my work life is very busy, but my home life, I don't have baseball games every night. I don't have 20 different practices that I'm running my kids to a day. So my home life has really calmed, which is a nice change of pace for us. And I think that's possibly across the board with individuals. I know many of you, your work life is still very crazy and chaotic and busy, but the idea to enjoy a game of Monopoly with my kids that lasted 3 nights because we were very engaged in it, or a game of some kind of board game or something that really engages with the family or engages with individuals. We play bingo every Sunday with my parents virtually. It is weird at first, but now it's just become commonplace. So I think it's okay to embrace the good, and it's honestly very healthy to look at what are the positive aspects of this situation that we found ourselves in, and what are some of the things that, I mean, we know all the negatives. So focusing on the good is actually a really good thing. Carmela, you don't drink coffee? Woohoo! There's a special club and handshake I'll let you know about. And yes, people do look at me like I'm from another planet too. Diane does. Oh, I'm feeling the love, guys. I love it because typically I'm the only person that doesn't drink coffee. So moving along, because I do want to keep us to time today. This is a fun one, and it is always, and I hear my husband actually doing it very often with his team building because, and I'm sure I've told you this, he works for an international company. So he has people in Bangalore, he has people in Dallas, he has people in Atlanta, he has people in Chicago, he has people here in Bloomington. And so one of the things that they do often as an icebreaker is 2 truths and a lie. So you say 3 things about yourself, 2 of which are true and 1 is a lie. And it does allow you to kind of see a window into that person and see how, you know, something fun that you would learn about them. So that's a really fun exercise. One of the things that I will share this, one of the things that my husband always uses is that he had the same kindergarten teacher as our son. And everyone thinks that's a lie, but it's actually true. It's bizarre, but it's true. He had her second year of teaching, and my son had her 2 years before she retired from teaching, but it's a fun 2 truths and a lie. This next one is very prominent if you have people who text a lot. So guess the emoji. And you can do this a couple different ways. There were a lot of different varieties on this. One is the idea of asking what the last emoji that someone used is. Or you ask people to ask people on your team. So I asked the 7 members of my team, send me the last 3 emojis that they used. And then I put them up there, and the team guesses who goes with what series of emojis. That's pretty fun too. That's also something that you can do in that happy hour on Teams. You can say, here's 4 emojis or 4 series of emojis, so 16 emojis. Who goes with which ones? Which goes with what? Which is a kind of a fun idea. 13 there is the aliens have landed, and that's kind of what is the plan if the aliens have landed? What are you going to tell them? What do you take to them? What are things that you want to address? Let's not use the game, hey, the world is experiencing a pandemic, because that one we're living. But the aliens have landed is a fun one that was brought up a lot. 14 is really something that know your team and know if this is something that they have time to do or if they want to do. It's a virtual book club. They talked about this being done in different ways. One is like an article instead of a book. So how do individuals have your team read an article and then talk about what it means to the work that you're doing? Virtual book club is basically you have everyone read the book and then they get together and discuss aspects of the book. There is a lot of things going on in our world today that can be very discussion-oriented. I would encourage you to stay away from the political ones. But there's a lot of great articles out there with like SpaceX, for example, and what that looks like, and maybe an article on that and then have a discussion, or an article on pick a topic. Or there's a lot of great books too. So that's something we've done as the university. Our faculty do that every summer. They have a virtual book club that we actually do when we're able to get together once a month and discuss the book. And they're always assigned by the dean, so they're a fun educational novel or something. But think about that. What is the stuff that you want your team to be reading about? What are things that you felt or that you've read that you really want to share out and have some discussion about? I know many of you are on several of these emails that come out from Workforce GPS and come out from National Governors Association, and all of these things that are really bogging up your email. But at the same time, there's some really great content in that. So what would you share out But then instead of just sharing it out, put that caveat of, hey, during the next staff meeting, we're going to talk about, we're going to discuss this. So it does two things. One, it has your team reading things that you want them to be reading. And two, it allows them to have a discussion and provide, insightful input into what they felt about that article. I'm a little reluctant about books in our space, but again, if you feel your team has time for a book, go ahead and do the book. The last one there is online team bingo, and that is something that they can, one of the recommendations, and I don't know that I'd say that this is a great idea, but I heard across the board, was you look at the remote work team bingo, so kind of that bingo chart that I had for the conference call earlier, and people start their week with that. So you send that out kind of in teams, and then at the end of the week, you can see who hit all the boxes, who had somebody who said, hello, I got knocked off, somebody who said, had the flushing toilet, things like that. It is kind of a lighthearted way to look at it, but that was brought up several times in several different articles about how do we build teams as that online team bingo. These are a couple extra that were really kind of thrown in there specifically for COVID. So the first 15 are things that were across the board for engaging individuals who work remotely, engaging into teams who work remotely. There was always a little spin with COVID, but a lot of it was stuff that you should do if you ever have people on your team who work remotely. But these three were highlighted several times by articles that are saying during COVID, these are really important. The Friday Retrospective, and every Friday a team would meet and share the accomplishments and the struggles from the week, both in work and life. So it's kind of that nice just touching base. And I don't know, like some agencies said that some companies said that they did it as a happy hour, later in the afternoon. Some said that they did it like at this time, 9 a.m. in the morning. Let's kind of get together and talk about how the week went. Let's talk about what we've accomplished. Let's kind of share and cheer. And that's one of the things that I know I've covered the last couple of weeks, is that idea of we really do need to be sure we're supporting and encouraging our team members who are doing great things and are pulling off masterful feats, which all of you are. Like, there's a lot of things that have been accomplished that is like, yeah, that's great, it's done. But take a second and say, wow, look at what we accomplished. Look at what we accomplished. Look at what got done. And just a little bit of accolade really goes a long way. So the Friday Retrospective has been used across the business sector, and I do think it's something to consider for your team. Internal news digest. Put together internal news digest and send out weekly to your team. Possibly lighthearted news about people or companies doing things despite the constraints of the moment. Really, that idea is the idea of not having just negative news all the time. Having something that shares the good things that are being done, something that highlights the wonderful things that are happening, where mankind is really stepping up and being taking care of their own instead of all these awful things that are on the news. So that's something to consider. And then personalize your one-on-ones. And this is something that I think you could start today. But for your regular one-on-one meetings, and when you talk with your direct report, so for ISU, for me anyway, we are required, once COVID came, we all wrote our plans. And within my plan, I said that I would meet with my team every week as a staff meeting, and then I would have personal one-on-ones with each member of my team. And during those one-on-ones, it's important to clarify the priorities, gauge engagement, resolve any conflicts, but always start with, are you okay? And then take a minute to listen. What this adjustment does is it allows you to prioritize your team's emotional state as the foremost during this very emotional and stressful time. And it allows you to say, I do care. How are you doing? Are you okay? And then move on into the work. Because one of the things that has happened with us all being separate is we don't know what's going on in the day-to-day as much as we did when we were all in the office together. We don't know if someone had an accident. We don't know if someone's grandmother passed away. We don't know all of those things that we would know if we were all in the same space. So when you're having those one-on-ones, starting with an are you okay kind of statement really does allow that humanity to come in. So consider that as you're communicating with people, and I'm guilty of just like any meeting. How's everybody doing? Are we okay today? Things like that, which is acceptable as well, but really important on those one-on-ones. because that's where you're going to have actual feedback and listening, and that opportunity to listen and to see how your team is doing. Because there might be something that is happening that's impacting their work, but if you don't ask, they're not going to tell. Does that make sense? All right. So now that we have these great tools and these fun things that we want to do, how do we do them? How do we go about doing them? Because we're all sitting in our houses, right? And you're not looking at the lovely tree line that I'm looking at right now. You're looking at whatever you're looking at in your office and workspace. So you have tools for video conferencing, sharing, and telecommunication. Here are some. WebEx, I know you have access to. I know that is a state preferred. Skype is free most of the time. There is a Skype business that's also available. That though is full video sharing. Like don't use it if you don't want to be seeing each other's faces. Google Meets used to be Google Hangouts. That's something that can be used. All of these have free subscriptions right now. I know WebEx is the one that you use the most for the state, but I also don't know if you have and I should have asked this, if you have one for your OET or if there is several call-in lines and who has access to those. So the reason I wanted to share all of these is because no matter where you are in the office chain, many of these are free right now. Do check with Do It. Do It seems to love GoToMeeting as much as they love Zoom, but they really don't love Google from what I understand. So everybody has different challenges with their setup. But all of these have similar functions. All of them work very similarly in that ability to be able to share your screen, look at each other, have those conversations. And then also just keep in mind when you're video conferencing camera position, you want to do that preview of how you look before you look. And that's one of the reasons I often say, if I can video conference it on my iPad, it's great because I can move it, because where Dell put the camera on my current laptop, it looks like right up my nose, which no one wants to see that. And then some of you might not even have cameras on your laptops. I know that that's common at times as well. So just kind of vary that around, but those are some options. Does anybody have any questions with these? Any that we want to go into more detail on? All right, we'll go ahead and move on. So tools for collaboration. You all have access to Microsoft Teams. We're going to spend the whole month of June talking about the different wonderful things that Microsoft Teams can do. I am going to be sending out, and Diane, I'm going to have you send out a survey as to, because the presenter is wanting to know, what do you want to know? What don't you want to know? What are some things that, you're interested in? And so that will be coming out early next week, because I'm going to have him contact you, Diane, to send that out. But for collaboration, Microsoft Teams is great. You can share documents. You can be editing live, which Google also does. But Microsoft Teams, you have that chat function. And that's really a nice way to keep the emails or those little conversations or those project-specific conversations out of your inbox. So let's say you're working on a deliverable, a project, a report. We'll just say generically a report. And all of you, there's 4 of you, and you're all contributing different things to that report. If you use Microsoft Teams and the chat function of Microsoft Teams, you're really going to be able to have there's 2 things that does. One, it keeps the conversation in one spot on that chat channel. And so that's nice. In addition to that, you have everyone's comments there, and you don't have to go sifting through your inbox to find all of those conversations. Because if you're like me, and I know many of you are, you get lots and lots of emails that are coming in and lots of content that's coming in that you're really not, some of it's great. And if you follow the Ohio, you're sorting it. But sometimes you get so many emails in a day, you aren't able to follow that whole Ohio model of, only touch it once or only handle it once. So how many of you have used Teams, and how many of you have used the chat function on Teams? So you're free to unmute yourself there. How many of you have used the chat function on Teams? Anyone? So Laura's used both. Patrick's used it. Brian's used it. So next week, Todd will go into where that is and what's being done, like how to do it if you have any questions. It is a really nice function. I like it best for project specific. So like if we're working on a presentation, we have a chat about that presentation. And then we also divide within channels. So you can have channels on different projects and different things. And it's a lot of fun, but it also really for organization does put everything in one place, which is nice. Google Docs, do you have access to Google Docs? I know like I've heard people do and people don't. If you do, there's some nice things with Google Docs that Teams also achieves, but Google Docs has a couple other things. Google Docs allows you to, the thing that when I started using it freaks me out because as I said, I'm a child of the 90s, it doesn't have a save, like it just automatically saves. So you assume it's all saved. But the nice thing that's done with Google Docs and with Microsoft Teams is like if you're talking about a document or responding to a document, you can go in and edit and you can see where people have edited. And that's really lovely because that way you can, instead of emailing it 22 times and having, some 400-page report being sent around to everybody, it can be in one spot and everybody can edit. You do want to make sure you set it up, especially for Google Docs, so you can tell who is editing what. Because a lot of times there are individuals who come in who what they say is like the EF button of what is said. So if they put in an edit, we're keeping that. And then if somebody comes in who is not at that level and edits and it's something that possibly is kind of, well, it could go this way or that way and we need to be going with the more senior leadership person, that's important to know. And Google Docs can be set up to do that, so can Microsoft Teams. But the collaboration for the social part is really fun, and looking at, again, setting up a channel for your coffee breaks or setting up a channel for your communication around, some ice breaking and things like that really does kind of allow that socialization that we need to have right now because we are all kind of separate but together. So any questions with those two tools? Yeah, and Laura, Google Docs and Teams are very similar. They do a lot of the same stuff. So I don't think Teams has that presentation, like Google has a little bit more of a bigger suite. They have the Google Slides and all that good stuff. But for sharing, it does work very similar. Any questions or comments? With that, I'm wrapping up a little early. Well, about 15 minutes early. Any comments or questions of anything I covered today? Any of those you're willing to try or want to try? Any of those 15? You guys are all very quiet. I will say one of the things that I did that I'm going to tell you not to do that I did do is, and John, I did it to you. When you said cruise, I said, oh, cruise. Don't do that to your team. That was not very nice of me. And be sure that if they do have an opinion on something, you are like, that's great. That's your, because that's their opinion and we're wanting them to share. I don't want John to feel that because I was reluctant about a cruise because of COVID, that is not a valid way to spend a vacation. So be sure, and I apologize for questioning your selection, John, but be sure you do that with your team. Be sure that you are open. And again, back to that idea of cultural frame of reference. You don't know what everyone is coming to the table with until you ask those questions and until you really engage with them and start to know them and communicate. There are some researchers I know, like Michi calls it your backpack or your collaborative, like he uses like a carriage word for it, but it's that idea of what are those things, what are those shared experiences, what are those things that have shaped the way in which you look at the world, the way in which you frame the world, and every single one of us has those. So as we're learning to navigate virtually and as we're learning more about our teams, it is important to understand that, because when you do get into those situations where, again, something happens that And it all, it does. Inevitably, something's going to happen that someone needs to have that stirring conversation. It's better if you have those relationships with those individuals, even if they are all virtual, it is still a relationship. So if they have those relationships and that's there, it does make those harder conversations easier, and it does make us able to kind of work through those things. So taking the time to build the camaraderie of your team really does benefit in the long run. All right. So this is my email, and I want to let you all know that we are going to share out an evaluation for these first 3. And part of that is going to be, what do you want to learn more about through professional development? Because these were things that were asked for and requested by the different teams. And so we are answering that call, but I want to know what else is needed as we move into fall. And if we need to, if there's something that does not fall within our wheelhouse, like for example, Microsoft Teams, I use it often, but I am not an expert on it. So we're bringing in Todd Jorns, and he'll be your speaker through June. And he'll do a fantastic job for you on going over what are all those fun things on Teams. He also has some organizational apps and things that he's willing to go into, but he wants to kind of know what you want to learn. So he'll send out an evaluation, a survey with that as well. And we'll have Diana send both those out early next week. If you do ever have any questions or anything, let me know. And then these have been recorded, and I will send those to Diane to share out with everybody. We'll have just a link on our website to all 3 recordings. So with that, have a wonderful Friday. It looks like, at least in central Illinois, our weather is going to be beautiful. So get outside and have a great weekend. And thank you very much.